The alarm screamed at 0545 inside the barracks at Fort Liberty. The metal lockers clanged as soldiers moved through the narrow hall boots, striking the floor in rhythm with the siren. The air smelled of detergent metal and morning humidity that always hung low over North Carolina. I pressed my hand against my chest. A sharp pain tore through the center of my ribs, stealing my breath before the day even began. My name is Staff Sergeant Cameron Ellis. I had learned to fight through pain, to swallow it like grit, and keep moving because weakness was never forgiven where I came from. I stood in front of the mirror, half-buttoned into my uniform, trying to adjust the collar when the door swung open. Patricia Monroe's reflection appeared behind me, my stepmother. She was not supposed to be in the barracks, but as a civilian medical contractor, she had a badge that let her walk through almost anywhere. She wore her usual pressed jacket, her blonde hair pulled tight, every inch of her body radiating control. Her eyes locked on me like searchlights. "What are you doing still standing here?" she snapped. "Formation starts in 10 minutes. You look pathetic." Her voice cut through the low murmur of soldiers. I tried to answer my words, trembling between fear and pain. "Ma'am, I need to go to the medic." My chest? "Enough with your chest." She moved closer, heels striking the floor like hammer blows. "You've embarrassed this family long enough with your imaginary problems." The air around us froze. I felt the eyes of 2 junior soldiers near the door, but none of them moved. No one ever crossed Patricia. My father had been a colonel, and she carried his shadow like armor. "Patricia, please," I whispered, keeping my posture straight, even though pain burned under my ribs. "It's getting worse. I just need to file a request for evaluation." She leaned closer, her breath sharp with coffee. "Stop faking weakness, Cameron. You are humiliating your father, humiliating me, humiliating everyone who believed you could serve with honor." Then the moment snapped. Her hand struck my shoulder and pushed me back. The locker behind me exploded with sound metal slamming into bone. Pain radiated across my chest like a lightning strike. My knees gave way and I fell to one side. The floor was cold and smelled of bleach. For a second, the world tilted. My ears rang voices blurred. Patricia's heels clicked beside my head. "Get up!" she ordered. "You think pity gets you promoted? You're nothing but drama in uniform." I tried to breathe, but each inhale felt like fire. Blood touched the corner of my lip. I pressed my palm against the locker to pull myself up. No one helped. I could see the reflection of faces in the metal, still silent, afraid. When I finally stood, my vision doubled. I stared at Patricia through the mirror. Her expression was calm, almost satisfied, as if punishing me was part of her morning routine. My uniform was wrinkled, my braid undone, and for the first time in months, I saw not a soldier, but a daughter trapped in someone else's war. She stepped closer, her voice lowering to a hiss. "Do not ask for medical leave again. You will show up. You will smile. You will not disgrace the Monroe name." It took everything in me to stay quiet. I wanted to shout to tell her that my last name was Ellis, not Monroe, that my loyalty belonged to the flag on my shoulder, not her obsession with perfection. But I swallowed it. Discipline, not emotion. That was what the Army had taught me. Still, somewhere inside, something cracked open. When she left, the door slammed so hard it echoed through the hall. The soldiers dispersed quickly. No one looked at me. No one ever did. I walked toward the sink, wiped the corner of my mouth, and stared at the reflection staring back. The bruise was already forming under my jaw, a faint purple shadow that pulsed with my heartbeat. I whispered to myself, "You're fine, Sergeant. You're fine." The words felt hollow. Behind me, the empty barracks hummed with the fluorescent lights. The pain was spreading now, climbing up toward my collarbone. My reflection blurred. I steadied my breathing, counting seconds like I was trained to during drills. 1 breath, 2, 3, hold, release. Outside, the morning bugle sounded echoing across the base. I adjusted my uniform and pulled my cap low. Every movement sent another wave of pain through my chest, but I refused to let it show. There was a moment just before I walked out when I caught my own eyes again in the mirror. They looked unfamiliar, cold, steady, but broken at the edges. As I stepped into the hallway, Patricia's voice still echoed in my head. "Stop faking weakness." The words burrowed deep, replaying with each step toward the parade ground. I could feel the anger rising beneath the surface, something slow and dangerous. No one would believe me. Not my commanding officer. Not my father. Not anyone who saw Patricia's perfect smile and clean record. But a thought flickered somewhere inside. The pain, maybe truth, didn't need permission. Maybe it only needed proof. I took one last look at the line of soldiers outside the morning sun bouncing off their name tags. The ache in my chest felt heavier than my gear. I squared my shoulders, forcing the breath out of my lungs. Discipline, I whispered again, not emotion. But as I walked into formation, every beat of my heart repeated the same silent sentence. This isn't weakness. This is the beginning. Have you ever been punished for something you never faked? Tell me where you're watching from. When people talk about family, they picture warmth, laughter, the smell of pancakes on Sunday mornings. I never had that after the age of 9. My earliest clear memory isn't of toys or birthday candles. It's of hospital disinfectant. My mother, Helen Ellis, was lying in a pale blue gown at Fayetteville General, her hair falling out in soft handfuls. I remember trying to braid what was left while the machines whispered around us. She smiled and said, "Don't be afraid, Cameron. Courage isn't loud." 2 weeks later, she was gone, and the house became colder than winter itself. My father, Colonel James Monroe, returned from deployment 3 days after the funeral. He looked like a man built out of orders and silence. When he hugged me, it felt like protocol, not love. He spoke at the service with his medals on his voice, unwavering, as if grief could be disciplined out of him. For months, he worked late, leaving me with the babysitter and empty plates. Then one evening, he came home with Patricia. She was beautiful, elegant, sharp, the kind of woman who looked like she had never spilled a drink in her life. Her handshake was firm, her smile perfect. She said, "You must be Cameron. Your father tells me you're very brave." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe anyone could fill the silence my mother left behind. But from the first week, she began rearranging everything. She threw away my mother's teacups, painted the living room beige, replaced the curtains, and called it a fresh start. I remember standing in the hallway clutching my mother's photograph when Patricia appeared with a garbage bag. "Put that down," she said softly. "We don't live in the past." When I refused, she took it from me anyway, slid the frame into the bag, and carried it outside. Later that night, I heard the faint crackle of fire from the trash barrel behind the garage. I ran barefoot, tears cutting down my face, and saw the photograph curling in the flames. My mother's smile melted into ash. Patricia didn't scold me for crying. She just watched her arms crossed and said, "Your mother made your father weak. I'm not going to let that happen again." After that night, the house wasn't mine. My father started using words he'd never used before. Discipline, efficiency, legacy. He remarried within 6 months, and Patricia became Mrs. Monroe. She changed the photos in the hallway to portraits of herself and my father in uniform, as if I had never existed before her. Every corner of that house whispered her authority. She controlled everything from the thermostat to my bedtime. I learned to move quietly to make myself small. My father thought we were bonding. He saw 2 women sharing a kitchen and mistook silence for peace. On weekends, he would ask Patricia to help Cameron toughen up. Those words gave her permission to critique everything: my posture, my tone, my grief. If I cried, she'd stand in the doorway and say, "Your tears are manipulation." If I stayed quiet, she'd smile and say, "See, you're learning." By 14, I had stopped showing emotion altogether. I trained my face to stay neutral. I learned to anticipate the sound of her heels in the hallway and vanish before she could find me. The only time I felt alive was during JROTC training at school. The instructors treated rules like religion, but at least the rules were clear. At home, Patricia's rules shifted like sand. I remember once overhearing her telling my father, "She still calls herself Ellis. It's disrespectful." He hesitated and said, "She'll grow out of it." She never let it go. On my 17th birthday, she gave me a wrapped box. Inside was a nameplate that read, "Cameron Monroe." She said, "It's time you stopped living in the shadow of a dead woman." I smiled and thanked her, then placed the nameplate in my drawer and never touched it again. A week later, she found it there and slapped the drawer shut so hard it split the wood. Ungrateful, she hissed. You're exactly like her. I didn't know if she meant my mother or the version of myself she was trying to erase. I started saving money from a part-time job at the PX, keeping it hidden inside an old JROTC handbook. The day I turned 18, I packed a single duffel bag, left a note on the kitchen counter, and walked to the bus station. I didn't look back. The Army recruiter asked if I was sure. I said yes before he could finish the question. In that moment, I wasn't running from Patricia. I was running toward silence structure and maybe freedom. But as I watched the bus pull away from Fayetteville, I caught sight of my father and Patricia standing by the mailbox. She had one hand on his arm, whispering something. He didn't wave. She smiled, and in that smile I understood what my mother had meant in her hospital bed. Courage isn't loud. It's leaving quietly even when your heart is breaking. Basic training at Fort Jackson felt like punishment and salvation wrapped into one. The shouting, the endless drills, the sleepless nights, none of it scared me. After living under Patricia's roof, discipline felt almost gentle. Orders made sense. They didn't shift like moods. The first time I earned praise from a drill sergeant, I remember biting the inside of my cheek to stop from crying. It wasn't love, but it was validation. When others broke down, I helped them up. Pain had taught me endurance. Silence had taught me how to listen. I rose quickly through the ranks, finding purpose in precision. The Army gave me what home never did, a code. For years, I buried the past beneath medals and early promotions. Then life, in its cruel symmetry, brought me back to North Carolina. I was 26 when the orders came through. New assignment, Fort Liberty, Fayetteville sector. My hands trembled as I read the location. Fate has a dark sense of humor. I told myself it was coincidence, not cosmic irony, but the first time I drove past the old exit sign for our neighborhood, my throat closed up. The house was only a few miles away, hidden behind pine trees that hadn't changed at all. I didn't stop. I couldn't. At first, Fort Liberty felt like a second chance. I was assigned to the logistics division responsible for equipment tracking and supply audits. I was good at it too. Good maybe. Within months, my commanding officer recommended me for advanced training in operational management. I told myself that the past was dead, that the girl who ran from Fayetteville no longer existed. But ghosts don't die just because you stop naming them. It started small. I was walking through the medical facility one afternoon signing off inventory when I heard her voice. Sharp, professional, unmistakable. Patricia Monroe, now a civilian medical contractor with access to nearly every administrative wing. I froze mid-step, every muscle remembering the old rhythm of fear. She turned the corner in a crisp blazer, a DoD badge clipped neatly to her lapel. Her hair was shorter, streaked with silver, but her eyes hadn't changed. They were still assessing judging. Well, she said with a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes if it isn't our little soldier. The hallway went silent. I straightened instinctively. Ma'am? She smirked. No need for formality. Though I suppose it's the only thing you ever learned properly. Every word felt like an echo from my teenage years. I wanted to walk away to keep my dignity, but she stepped closer. Your father speaks highly of you, she said. He thinks the Army fixed you. I didn't respond. She leaned in just enough to let her perfume sharp lavender burn into my senses. Don't make me regret recommending you for this base, she whispered. It was a lie. I knew she hadn't recommended me, but she wanted me to believe she still controlled the narrative. In that moment, something inside me hardened. I gave her a nod, turned on my heel, and walked away. The soldier in me knew confrontation was a trap. The daughter in me wanted to scream. The next few weeks blurred together in quiet hostility. I caught her hovering near my workstation, reviewing files she had no clearance for. Once, she left a sticky note on my desk, "Discipline starts at home." It was written in her perfect cursive. When I brought it up to the administrative officer, he shrugged. She's a contractor sergeant. She probably meant well. The same dismissal I'd heard my whole life. Patricia thrived in it. Her power wasn't brute force, it was influence. She knew how to make cruelty look like professionalism. One evening as I filed reports in the empty office, I caught my reflection in the glass. The uniform, the stripes, the nameplate that read Ellis. For a moment, I imagined my mother's voice whispering again, "Courage isn't loud." I looked down at my chest, feeling the faint ache that had started weeks ago. Sharp pain under the sternum that came and went without warning. I rubbed the spot thinking it was strain from physical training. The thought of seeing a doctor almost made me laugh. Patricia worked with every physician on base. That night, as I locked the office, I saw her standing by the hallway exit, her face half lit by the flickering light. "You still using that name?" she asked softly. I paused. "It's my mother's name." "She's gone," Patricia said. "It's time you let her go too." I walked past her without another word, but my heart pounded with something I hadn't felt in years. Not fear this time, but rage. The kind that doesn't shout. The kind that waits. Fate hadn't sent me back to Fayetteville to relive the past. It had sent me here to end it. By late spring, the pain in my chest had grown from a dull ache to a stabbing pulse that flared every time I lifted gear. It started after morning drills, but now it followed me everywhere in the mess hall during briefings, even when I tried to sleep. I kept telling myself it was stress, nothing more. The last thing I wanted was Patricia whispering through the bass that her stepdaughter couldn't handle pressure. But in a place where discipline is worshipped, hiding pain was easy. I wore it like a uniform buttoned up tight. It began to unravel the morning she appeared at the logistics office unannounced. I was reviewing an equipment ledger when the door opened and her perfume reached me before her voice did. "Sergeant Ellis," she said, the words sliding like oil. "Your commanding officer asked me to audit your supply records." I glanced up. She wasn't supposed to be here. Medical contractors didn't audit logistics. But Patricia had always known how to bend rules until they looked like favors. She leaned against the file cabinet, crossing her arms. "You've been logging a lot of sick days," she added. "Trouble keeping up. I haven't missed a shift," I replied quietly. "Just working longer hours." She smiled thinly. "Your file suggests otherwise." When she left, I checked my personnel system access. A new notation had been added: evaluation pending psychosomatic fatigue. My stomach turned. That wasn't just paperwork. It was a red flag that could derail a career. I knew exactly who had placed it there. Over the next few weeks, small things started changing. My medical appointment requests disappeared from the queue. My supervisor stopped approving overtime forms. A few colleagues began avoiding me in the cafeteria. One afternoon, I overheard two lieutenants whispering near the coffee station. "She's the one Patricia mentioned," one said. "Overreacts to stress." The other nodded, her files being reviewed. That night, I went back to my quarters and stared at my reflection until the room blurred. I wanted to scream, but all that came out was a whisper. "She's doing it again." I remembered being a teenager trying to convince my father that Patricia had burned my mother's photos, only to hear him say, "She's trying to help you move on." The memory made my pulse race harder than the pain in my chest. A few days later, during a field inspection, I collapsed. The world tilted sideways, my knees hit gravel, and my vision flashed white. My squad leader called for a medic. When I came to, Patricia was standing over me with a clipboard. She wasn't even assigned to the exercise yet. There she was. "Heat exhaustion," she told the medic before I could speak. "Happens all the time. She'll be fine." I wanted to protest, but my tongue felt heavy. The medic helped me sit up. Patricia crouched beside me, lowering her voice. "You'll thank me for this later. If the CO hears you're collapsing on duty, your record's finished." Her hand brushed the back of my neck, a mock gesture of comfort that made my stomach twist. "You'll be fine, Cameron," she repeated softly. "Just don't make this dramatic." The next morning, an email arrived from the medical review board confirming a mandatory evaluation. Patricia's signature was listed in the request line. Attached was a report claiming I'd exhibited psychosomatic symptoms inconsistent with injury. She'd diagnosed me without ever examining me officially. I printed the email and folded it neatly, sliding it into the inside pocket of my jacket. My hands shook not from fear, but from realization. She wasn't just manipulating me. She was building a paper trail to destroy me. The same afternoon, I saw her talking to my father outside the base visitor center. He was visiting for a veterans conference, his posture as rigid as ever. Patricia touched his arm, speaking softly. He nodded, frowning. When she saw me approach, her expression shifted into something smooth and professional. "Your father worries you're overworking again," she said. My father looked at me confused and tired. Cameron maybe listened to Patricia. She knows medicine. In that moment, I felt 19 again, small, unseen, erased by the same woman who'd burned my mother's memory and now was burning my credibility. But I wasn't that child anymore. I saluted him, turned to her, and said evenly, "You may know medicine, Patricia, but you've forgotten what integrity looks like." Her eyes narrowed. "Careful, Sergeant. Pride can end a career." "Sometimes it saves one," I said quietly. That was the first time she realized I wasn't afraid anymore. The following weeks turned into a slow war fought in silence. Patricia didn't yell, she didn't strike. She didn't have to. Every rumor, every missing document, every subtle change in tone from my colleagues carried her fingerprints. She was the kind of enemy who didn't shoot, she suffocated. My medical leave requests were now rerouted without explanation. When I asked admin, they said, "System error, Sergeant, happens all the time." But it didn't happen to anyone else. One night after a 12-hour shift, I stayed late in the logistics office to cross-check inventory. The building was nearly empty, the air heavy with the hum of the lights. I heard the door open behind me and knew before turning who it was. Patricia stood in the doorway holding a clipboard she didn't need. "Still working. You always did try too hard," she said, her voice calm, almost pitying. I didn't answer. She stepped closer, her heels clicking in rhythm. "You should rest. People are starting to notice. They think you're fragile." I kept typing. She leaned against my desk, lowering her voice. "I told your father you remind me of Helen lately, too. Emotional, too dramatic." He agreed. "It's sad, really. You could have been so much like him." That name, Helen, cracked something open inside me. I stood slowly. "You don't get to say her name," I said, my voice steady though my hands trembled. Patricia's smile didn't falter. "Oh, Cameron, you're still that little girl crying over ashes in the backyard. Some of us grow up. You never did." She walked out, leaving the scent of lavender and the echo of her words behind. I sat down again, but the ledger numbers blurred. My breathing quickened. I pressed my palm to my chest, feeling that familiar sharp pain under the sternum, the one I'd convinced myself was nothing. For the first time, I wasn't sure I believed that anymore. A few days later, I was summoned to an internal meeting about personnel conduct. The moment I entered the conference room, I knew it wasn't a discussion, it was an ambush. My supervisor sat stiffly at the head of the table, 2 officers from admin beside him. Patricia stood near the projector screen, her tablet glowing. "Sergeant Ellis," my supervisor began, "there have been concerns regarding your recent performance and your interactions with staff." I stared at him. "Concerns?" Patricia clicked her tablet and the projector filled with an image of my medical chart highlighted notations about stress-related fatigue and emotional instability. "These are unauthorized," I said. "You have no clearance to display my medical file." She smiled faintly. "Actually, as part of the wellness program, I was asked to review active cases. Your name came up." I looked around the room. No one questioned her. I realized she'd already poisoned the well long before I walked in. I could hear my pulse pounding in my ears, could almost smell the same metallic scent from the locker that day she shoved me. Patricia's voice softened, almost kind. "Cameron, no one is trying to hurt you. We just want to make sure you're getting the help you need." The word help felt like a noose. When the meeting ended, I walked straight out into the sunlight, blinking hard. The base looked exactly the same, orderly, calm, secure, but for the first time, I felt how fragile that order was. I was standing in a place built on trust and hierarchy, and Patricia had turned both into weapons. That night, I sat at my desk replaying every word she'd said, every lie she'd told my father, every silence I'd allowed. Then I opened the drawer and pulled out a small black pen, the one issued for field documentation, the one that could record audio when switched into briefing mode. I tested it quietly. The red light blinked once, then steadied. I placed it back in my breast pocket. I didn't plan to fight her in the dark anymore. I would let her words destroy her instead. 2 days later, the opportunity came. We were scheduled for a supply inspection with the medical division, a joint review between logistics and health services. Patricia would be there. Of course, she never missed a chance to show authority in rooms that weren't hers. I arrived early, the pen recorder clipped inside my uniform voice mode activated but invisible. The conference room smelled of stale coffee and paperwork. Patricia entered 10 minutes late, her heels clicking a steady rhythm of dominance. She began the meeting with that smooth, commanding tone she always used in front of officers. "We've had recurring discrepancies in Sergeant Ellis's reports," she announced. The words dropped like stones. I kept my face calm. "Would you like to specify those discrepancies, ma'am?" She turned toward me, pretending to look surprised. "Cameron, no need to be defensive. We're all on the same side." Her eyes flicked toward the colonel in charge of the review. "Unfortunately, her recent behavior has raised questions about her mental stability and reliability under stress." I felt the air tighten. The colonel's gaze shifted to me. "Is that true, Sergeant?" I stood every inch of my uniform feeling heavier than armor. "No, sir. My work has been accurate and verifiable. Any confusion stems from unauthorized access to my records." Patricia laughed softly. "Unauthorized? My dear, you signed the consent form months ago." "No," I said evenly. "You forged it." The room went still. Her face froze for a second, then recovered into her usual calm. "Careful what you accuse me of," she said. "Defamation isn't a career move?" I met her stare. "Neither is falsifying data." A few heads turned. Patricia smiled as if amused. "You should rest Cameron. Your heart condition might be affecting your judgment." The colonel frowned. "Heart condition?" She handed him a printed sheet. "The file indicates episodes of chest pain and anxiety." I took a breath, steadying myself. "Sir, those notes were added without medical confirmation. I've requested proper testing 3 times and been denied." He hesitated. Denied by whom? Patricia's hand froze mid-motion. I could almost feel the tension ripple through the room. "Administrative delays," she said smoothly. But her voice had lost its rhythm. That was when I knew the pen was catching everything. Every lie, every manipulation, every word that revealed the quiet cruelty behind her polished tone. The meeting ended without a verdict. Patricia left first, the air around her sharp with lavender and fury. I stayed behind, thanking the colonel for his time. He nodded slowly, suspicion now clouding his expression. As I walked out, the sunlight hit the insignia on my chest, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something shift inside me. Not victory, not yet, but direction. That evening, I returned to my quarters and transferred the recording to my encrypted drive. Her voice filled the room smooth and venomous. Every word was clear. The next morning, I went to the base clinic under the pretext of routine evaluation. The nurse on duty glanced at my file and frowned. "Your record says psychosomatic fatigue, but there's no doctor's signature." I smiled faintly. "Exactly." She hesitated, then whispered, "If you want someone objective, talk to Dr. Rebecca Nash. She just transferred here from Fort Carson. She doesn't play politics." The name meant nothing to me then, but later it would change everything. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I replayed the meeting again and again, the sound of Patricia's voice looping in my mind. The pain in my chest flared with every breath, but this time I didn't suppress it. Pain was proof. Proof that something real was breaking through the lies. Outside the base was quiet, the floodlights stretching shadows across the field. I whispered into the dark, "You built this story, Patricia, but I'm going to finish it." The morning started like every other formation orders, the hum of routine that kept soldiers moving even when their bodies begged to stop. But my chest felt heavier that day, each inhale cutting like glass. I kept pushing through the motions, refusing to show pain. During equipment loading, the weight of a crate sent a surge of agony through my sternum. The world tilted. I heard someone shout my name, then the ground rushed up. Everything went white. When I opened my eyes, the ceiling above me buzzed with fluorescent light. The smell of antiseptic hit me first clean and sharp. A nurse leaned over. "Stay still, Sergeant Ellis. You passed out during inspection." My voice came out as a whisper. "Where am I, Womack Army Medical Center?" she said. "You're safe." The name hit me harder than the fall. Womack, the one place Patricia had influence. Panic rippled through me. I tried to sit up, but a firm hand pressed me back. "Easy," said a voice I didn't recognize. I turned my head. A woman stood beside the bed. dark hair pulled into a bun uniform, immaculate but not familiar. Her badge read, Dr. Rebecca Nash. I'm your attending physician, she said calmly. You're going to be okay, but we need to talk about your symptoms. Her tone wasn't patronizing or rushed. It was steady professional. For the first time in months, someone sounded like they believed me. She flipped through my file. Chest pain, dizziness, fainting. How long has this been happening? Months, I said quietly. But my file, I've read it, she interrupted. Or rather what someone added to it. Those notes don't match your physical condition. My heart jumped. You noticed hard not to, she said, eyes narrowing. These edits aren't even formatted properly. Whoever did this didn't follow medical protocol. She glanced up. Any idea who might have made these changes? The question hung heavy. I met her gaze and said nothing. All right, she continued. Then let's start fresh. She ordered an X-ray and additional scans. Hours later, I was wheeled into the imaging room. The machine hummed around me loud and mechanical. Every click sounded like a countdown. I lay there thinking about how many times I'd been told the pain was imaginary. I wondered if my body was finally ready to betray me or to save me. When the scans ended, I was taken back to my room. The air conditioning hummed softly. I stared at the ceiling tiles, tracing invisible cracks. For the first time since I joined the army, I didn't care about appearing strong. I just wanted truth, no matter how ugly. The door opened. Dr. Nash stepped in, holding a tablet. Her expression was grave, but focused. She closed the door behind her and lowered her voice. Sergeant Ellis, I'm going to be direct. Your X-rays show a microfracture on your sternum and inflammation consistent with blunt force trauma. These injuries didn't come from training. My throat tightened. What does that mean? It means someone hurt you, she said simply. And based on the age of the fracture, it wasn't recent. It's been worsening for weeks. I felt my stomach drop. The room blurred. Are you sure? She nodded. Completely. I've already contacted radiology for confirmation. This should have been caught months ago. She paused. You said earlier that your medical requests were denied. I nodded slowly. 3 times, and the person who processed them she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. I didn't answer. The silence was enough. Dr. Nash exhaled through her nose, setting the tablet on the counter. I've seen administrative manipulation before, but not like this. Whoever did this put your health at serious risk. I closed my eyes. All I could see was Patricia's face, the cold satisfaction in her eyes that morning she'd told the colonel I was unstable. Now I knew why she'd been so confident she thought she'd erased the evidence. But she hadn't. My body had kept its own record one she couldn't rewrite. Dr. Nash didn't waste time. She called in a senior nurse to document everything, taking photographs and securing copies of the scans in a separate encrypted file. Her precision was surgical, her voice calm, but edged with purpose. You're not going anywhere until we run a full cardiac evaluation, she said. If you were my soldier at Fort Carson, I'd have pulled you from duty weeks ago. I tried to smile, but my chest burned. If I'd been your soldier, ma'am, you wouldn't have needed to. She looked at me for a long moment, then nodded as if understanding more than I'd said. Hours passed. Blood tests monitoring vitals, each procedure felt like a step toward truth. When Dr. Nash returned with the preliminary report, she sat beside my bed. You have mild myocarditis, she said. Inflammation of the heart muscle, likely from repeated physical trauma. The good news is it's treatable if we act now. I swallowed hard. And if we hadn't... Permanent damage, she said softly. Maybe worse. I turned away, blinking back the sting in my eyes. It wasn't fear of the diagnosis. It was the realization that Patricia's lies had nearly destroyed more than my reputation. They had almost destroyed me. Dr. Nash set the tablet down and folded her hands. You said earlier that your records were altered. I need to know who has access. I hesitated. A civilian contractor, I said finally. Patricia Monroe. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. Any relation? My stepmother, I whispered. Her expression didn't change, but something in her posture shifted, a mix of disbelief and restrained anger. Then this isn't administrative negligence, she said. It's targeted interference. She stood, pacing slowly. I'll need a statement from you and I'll report this to the base medical commander. My pulse quickened. She's powerful here. She knows people in admin, maybe even the commander. Then we'll make sure it doesn't get buried, Dr. Nash said. You'll sign your report and I'll send it through official channels and backup copies through JAG. I've handled worse. Her confidence steadied me more than she could have known. For the first time, I felt the possibility of protection that didn't come from rank or reputation, but from truth. Before she left, she turned back. One more thing, she said. If you have any proof, anything beyond testimony, it will help. I hesitated, then reached into the drawer beside my bed. The small pen recorder lay there, still clipped to the fabric pouch I'd carried in my uniform. I placed it in her hand. This recorded our last meeting, I said. She accused me of being unstable, threatened my career. I didn't plan to use it. It was for my own record, but maybe it's what you need. Dr. Nash examined it carefully, then nodded. We'll extract the audio under chain of custody. Thank you, Sergeant. After she left, I stared at the ceiling again, my mind replaying the moment Patricia's voice had filled the conference room. I imagined her face when confronted with her own words, cool, polished, breaking at the edges. For once, she wouldn't control the narrative. The next day, Dr. Nash returned with a sealed envelope. It's official, she said quietly. The report has been filed. The audio evidence corroborates your claim. It's being reviewed by the base inspector general. My breath caught. So it's real now, I said softly. Not just my word against hers. It was always real, Dr. Nash replied. Now it's documented. Later that afternoon, I was moved to a private room for observation. The nurses were kind, careful, their voices hushed around me. I could feel the atmosphere shifting. People knew something was happening, though no one dared to say it aloud. Through the window, the flag outside fluttered against the pale sky. It struck me how fragile truth could be, how easily it could be silenced by power, and yet how unstoppable it became once someone dared to record it. 2 days later, the investigation began quietly, but moved faster than anyone expected. Patricia's confidence had always been her shield. She believed no one would question her authority. But Dr. Nash's report landed directly on the desk of the medical commander, bypassing the administrative staff Patricia controlled. By morning, the atmosphere at Womack changed. People whispered in hallways the way soldiers do when something big is coming. I could feel the shift before anyone told me. The nurse checking my vitals avoided eye contact, then finally murmured, "They're reviewing her credentials." My pulse quickened. That afternoon, I heard the door open. Patricia walked in, her posture immaculate, her tone calm but tight. "You've caused quite a mess, Cameron," she said. "Investigators asking questions, pulling files. Do you know what that does to morale?" I sat up slowly. "Morale isn't built on lies," I said. Her eyes narrowed. "You think you've won because some idealistic doctor believes you. This base runs on reputation, not sympathy. When they're done with me, they'll come for you." I met her stare. "I'm not afraid of the truth anymore." She moved closer, her voice dropping. "You should be. I made you invisible once. I can do it again." The words chilled me, but I didn't flinch. "You don't control this anymore," I said quietly. "Your words did, and now they're recorded." For the first time, her expression faltered. "Recorded?" She repeated, her voice cracking just slightly. "You didn't." I didn't have to answer. The silence was enough. She stared at me for a long moment, then turned sharply and left the room. That evening, Dr. Nash returned. "The audio has been authenticated," she said. "The Inspector General heard it. The investigation's expanding to include medical record tampering." I exhaled slowly, the relief heavy but incomplete. "What happens now?" "Now," she said, "you rest, and tomorrow you tell your story to the review board." The next morning, 2 officers escorted me to a small conference room near the administrative wing. My hands shook as I saluted and took my seat. Across from me sat the board members, composed, impassive. Patricia was there too, her uniform-perfect attire gleaming under the fluorescent lights. But this time she didn't look untouchable. The first question was simple. "Sergeant Ellis, describe your experience regarding medical interference." I spoke carefully, laying out every detail: the denied appointments, the falsified records, the humiliation, the collapse. My voice didn't tremble. When they played the audio from the pen recorder, the sound of her voice filled the room. Cold, condescending, calculated. Even stripped of context, it sounded cruel. The moment she said, "Your heart condition might be affecting your judgment," one of the officers looked up sharply. Patricia sat frozen, her jaw tight. When the recording ended, silence pressed down like weight. The lead officer turned to her. "Ms. Monroe, do you deny making these statements?" Her lips parted, but no sound came. "Do you deny accessing classified medical files without authorization?" Her face flushed. "I was concerned for her well-being," she said finally, the smoothness gone from her tone. "She needed supervision." "Supervision doesn't include altering diagnostic codes," the officer replied flatly. Patricia's composure broke. "You don't understand," she said. "I was protecting this family." Her father. "Her father isn't under review," the officer interrupted. "You are." I sat there watching the woman who had ruled my life unravel one sentence at a time. For years, she'd crafted an image of control. Now, every lie was dissolving under fluorescent truth. When the hearing adjourned, Patricia stood without looking at me and walked out. The officers stayed silent until the door closed. One of them nodded. "You did the right thing, Sergeant." As I left the room, sunlight flooded through the hallway windows, warm and sharp. My chest still hurt, but for the first time, the pain felt like something leaving instead of something growing. The truth had a sound now steady, undeniable, and finally mine. The bass felt different after the hearing. It wasn't louder or busier, just sharper, like the air had learned how to listen. People no longer spoke Patricia's name out loud, but I saw it flicker behind their eyes every time they looked at me. The investigation had gone above local command, now reaching the Regional Department of Defense Medical Board. She wasn't gone yet, but the silence around her had turned from respect to fear. For weeks, I focused on recovery following Dr. Nash's orders, rebuilding strength with each passing day. The bruises faded, the pain dulled, but the anger stayed steady, quiet, waiting. Then one morning, an official notice arrived at my quarters. It was an invitation to the Army Achievement Medal ceremony for outstanding service in logistics. My name was on the list. For a second, I thought it was a mistake. Then I realized it was deliberate. Dr. Nash must have submitted my name before the incident. The timing felt poetic. The ceremony would take place at the main hall, Fort Liberty, in front of officers, families, contractors, everyone. I ironed my uniform with hands that didn't quite stop shaking. The reflection in the mirror was different from the one that had stared back from the locker weeks ago. My face still carried faint shadows, but my eyes no longer looked like they belonged to someone hiding. Before leaving, I opened my locker and looked at the folded paper inside a copy of my X-ray report. The lines of white and gray looked like evidence carved in stone. I slid it into my inner pocket and buttoned the flap. The ceremony hall smelled of polish and flowers. Rows of chairs stretched under banners that read "Excellence, Honor Service." Families filled the seats, laughter bouncing against the high ceiling. I stood with my unit near the stage, the hum of conversation surrounding me like static. At the far end of the hall, I saw Patricia enter with my father. She wore a dark blue suit, her hair pinned perfectly, her smile back in place. My father looked older, his step slower, but his pride still visible in the stiff way he stood beside her. He hadn't spoken to me since the hearing. When our eyes met across the room, he looked away. As the ceremony began, names were called, medals pinned, photos taken. Applause rolled like distant thunder. When they reached mine, I stepped forward, heart steady but mind racing. The general shook my hand, saying words I barely heard. Then, as applause started, Patricia's voice cut through the hall, cold and clear. "She doesn't deserve that medal." The sound sliced through the air, silencing the crowd. Every head turned. I froze, the medal still cold in my hand. "She faked her illness." Patricia continued, her voice rising. "She's been manipulating this base for sympathy." Murmurs rippled through the audience. I saw Dr. Nash rise from her seat, near the front, her expression turning to steel. I took a breath, feeling the room tilt between disbelief and spectacle. It was happening again, but this time, I wasn't the one who would fall. For a heartbeat, the hall stayed frozen, no one daring to move. Patricia's voice echoed off the polished walls, dripping venom wrapped in righteousness. "You all think she's a hero," she shouted. "She's been sick for attention since she was a child." Ask her father. Gasps rippled through the room. My father's hand twitched at his side, but he didn't speak. I could feel hundreds of eyes swing toward me, some pitying, others skeptical. My body tensed, not from fear, but from a calm so sharp it burned. Dr. Nash stepped forward, but I raised my hand slightly. "It's all right, ma'am," I said, my voice cutting through the noise like a wire drawn tight. "Let her talk." Patricia blinked, taken aback for a fraction of a second before continuing. "I spent years trying to help this girl, and she repaid me by spreading lies. I'm the one who saved her career. I fixed her records. I kept her from being discharged for psychological instability." Her words landed heavy, designed to sting, but I could see the cracks forming at the edges of her control. She was unraveling publicly exactly as truth demanded. I turned toward the crowd, my hands steady. "I never asked for sympathy," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried. I asked for medical help. I asked to be believed. And when that didn't work, I made sure the truth could speak for itself. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small flash drive, the same one Dr. Nash had helped me secure under official chain of custody. Everything she just said can be tested against her own words. Patricia's face drained of color. "You wouldn't dare," she hissed. "This is a ceremony." "Exactly," I replied, "and every ceremony honors truth." The general hesitated, then nodded slightly toward the technician by the projection screen. Within seconds, the speakers crackled to life. First came silence, then Patricia's recorded voice, calm, professional, unmistakable. "Stop faking weakness, Cameron. You're humiliating this family." The sound hit the audience like a physical blow. More followed her, shouting the metallic thud of the locker, the words that had haunted my sleep. Each echo stripped away her image of control, layer by layer. My father's face went gray. His lips parted, but no sound came. When the last second of the recording ended, the room stayed utterly still. Patricia's composure shattered. You set me up," she stammered. "You edited that. She's manipulating all of you." Dr. Nash rose, calmly holding up a signed verification document. "That recording was authenticated by the Inspector General's office," she said. "Chain of custody maintained from the moment Sergeant Ellis submitted it. It is, in fact, your voice, Ms. Monroe." The authority in her tone left no room for denial. The crowd began murmuring again, but now the sound was different. Disbelief, anger, shame. Patricia's breath came in short gasps. "James," she pleaded, turning to my father, "tell them this isn't real." He just stared at the screen, his eyes reflecting the image frozen there. Her face twisted mid-yell, caught forever in the act she'd denied. For the first time in my life, I saw my father speechless. The man who once commanded battalions and silenced rooms with a single glance now stood frozen, his face pale and trembling. "Patricia," he whispered, but it wasn't a defense. It was disbelief. She took a step toward him, her hand outstretched, the perfect picture of desperation. "James, you know me. You know I wouldn't hurt her. She's lying. She's always been dramatic." But her voice cracked under the weight of her own performance, and I could see the crowd begin to turn. Soldiers, medics, even officers shifted uneasily in their seats. Truth had a way of changing posture. People who once looked down on me now couldn't meet my eyes. Dr. Nash crossed her arms, her calm unshaken. "There's more," she said quietly. "If the commanding officer permits, I can play the medical report summary. It's public record now." The general gave a curt nod. "Do it." The speakers filled again with a soft hum, then Dr. Nash's recorded voice came through. "Patient exhibits signs of blunt force trauma to the sternum consistent with external impact. Injuries do not correlate with standard field training." The confirmation was surgical, undeniable. Every word carved deeper into Patricia's illusion. My father lowered his head into his hands. Patricia's lips moved soundlessly, as if searching for one last manipulation that might still work. When none came, her expression twisted from fear to fury. "You think this makes you strong," she spat. "You think embarrassing me in front of them will fix what's broken in you. You're pathetic." Something inside me clicked. Not anger, but clarity. I stepped closer, each word deliberate. "What's broken?" I said, is the belief that silence keeps peace. My voice didn't shake. You told me discipline meant obedience. That pain made me worthy. But you never taught me that love without respect isn't strength, it's control. The hall stayed hushed except for the low hum of the microphone. I turned toward the audience, meeting their eyes one by one. Some of you saw what was happening and said nothing. I said softly, "You told yourselves it wasn't your place. That's how abuse survives in silence. Not because no one sees, but because those who see decide it's easier not to act." The weight of my words settled over them like dust, heavy, undeniable, real. I looked back at Patricia. Her face had lost all color. "You wanted power," I said quietly, "and you called it protection. But the only thing you protected was your pride." She stumbled backward, bumping into a chair. My father reached out instinctively, but she jerked away, humiliated. The crowd watched her unravel completely. The same woman who'd built her image on precision and dominance now looked small, just another person who'd built an empire out of fear and found it crumbling in daylight. For the first time, the hall belonged to truth, and I didn't need to shout to make it heard. Patricia's breath came in shallow bursts as she stumbled toward the aisle, her perfect heels scraping the polished floor. "This is harassment," she shouted, her voice cracking under the weight of the room's silence. "You people are destroying an innocent woman." No one answered. The base commander's face was stone. The general's hands were clasped behind his back, unmoving. Even the soldiers who once smiled politely at her now turned away. She spun toward my father again, eyes wide with desperation. "James, please," she pleaded. "Tell them I did everything for this family." My father slowly rose from his chair, his uniform immaculate but his expression broken. "Everything you did," he said quietly, "was for control." The hall went still again. "You told me she needed discipline," he continued. "You told me her pain was weakness. I believed you because it was easier than believing I'd failed my own daughter." Patricia's lips trembled. "You don't mean that," she whispered. "I meant every word he said. And now you can answer for what you did." She froze, her confidence collapsing into something jagged and raw. For a long second, I thought she might charge forward again, but instead, she let out a sound I'd never heard before, a small, strangled sob that barely reached the front row. Her body shook, her shoulders hunched, and for the first time she looked human, not powerful, not proud, just exposed. The military police at the back of the hall began to move their boots, clicking steadily against the floor. Patricia looked up, realization dawning too late. "You called them," she whispered. The general nodded slightly. "Per federal regulation, civilian contractors under investigation are to be escorted pending inquiry." As they approached, she tried one last time to regain her mask. "You can't arrest me here," she hissed. "This is a ceremony." "No," I said softly. Stepping forward, "This is accountability." The words landed like a final verdict. The MPs took her by the arms, not roughly but firmly, and began leading her toward the exit. As she passed, she turned her head toward me. For a flicker of a second, our eyes met. There was no fury left, no superiority, only exhaustion. "You think this makes you free?" she said, her voice hoarse. "Freedom isn't what you think it is." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She was gone before the next breath left my lungs. The silence afterward felt almost sacred. The general cleared his throat. "Let's continue," he said quietly, but the ceremony was already something else now, no longer about medals or speeches. It had become a reckoning. I stood there, medal still in my hand, my heartbeat steady for the first time in months. My father looked at me from across the room. His eyes were red, but his chin lifted slightly, almost like a salute. And in that tiny gesture, I recognized something I'd thought I'd never see again, not pride in appearance, but pride in truth. The ceremony never truly resumed. The speeches were cut short, the applause muted, and yet somehow the silence felt louder than any ovation could have been. The general stepped forward, his expression unreadable, but his voice steady. "Staff Sergeant Cameron Ellis," he said, "for courage, integrity, and service under extraordinary personal adversity, You are hereby awarded the Army Achievement Medal. The words struck something deep inside me, not pride, but a quiet release. When he pinned the medal to my uniform, his hand lingered just a moment longer than protocol required, as if to acknowledge everything left unsaid. I saluted, my posture straight, but my chest felt heavy with emotion. As I turned toward the audience, every face blurred except one, my father's. He was standing now, tears streaming freely, the mask of command finally gone. When I stepped down from the stage, he moved toward me hesitantly, unsure if he still had the right. Cameron, he began, his voice low, almost breaking. I don't deserve forgiveness. I looked at him for a long moment, the distance between us filled with years of silence and pain. Maybe not, I said softly, but you deserve the chance to learn from it. He nodded slowly, his shoulders shaking, and then he did something I'd never seen him do in public. He hugged me. Not the stiff, formal gesture of a military man, but a real embrace, trembling, desperate human. For a second, I let myself lean into it. Then the weight of the room pressed back in. Reporters' whispered flashes blinked, the murmur of questions began. I stepped back, straightened my uniform, and faced them. You want to know what happened? I said clearly. What happened is what always happens when image matters more than integrity, when pain is dismissed as weakness, when silence is rewarded. My voice rose not with anger, but conviction. This isn't just about one contractor or one soldier. It's about every person who was told to endure instead of speak. That ends today. The audience erupted not in chaos, but in a standing wave of applause that filled the entire hall. Soldiers, civilians, medics, officers, all on their feet. It wasn't celebration. It was acknowledgement. Somewhere near the back, Dr. Nash wiped her eyes discreetly. She met my gaze, nodded once, and mouthed, "You did it." I exhaled, my chest aching from more than just injury. In that moment, I wasn't a victim or a soldier or someone's daughter. I was proof that truth once spoken couldn't be silenced again. As the crowd slowly dispersed, I found myself standing near the edge of the stage, the metal cool against my skin. The light through the windows turned golden, catching in the dust motes suspended in air. I thought of Patricia's last words, "Freedom isn't what you think it is," and realized she was half right. Freedom wasn't the absence of fear. It was the decision to face it anyway. I looked toward the flag outside, rippling in the late afternoon wind, and whispered, "You can't erase what's been seen." The world outside Fort Liberty didn't pause when the headlines hit, but for me, everything moved in slow motion. The morning after the ceremony, the story had already spread beyond the base. Army contractor under investigation for medical record. Tampering the Fayetteville Observer. Read with my photo medal still pinned beside the article. I stared at it in disbelief. My phone buzzed non-stop messages from soldiers, classmates, even civilians I'd never met. Most said the same thing. "Thank you for speaking up." Some told their own stories, short sentences that carried lifetimes of pain. But beneath the flood of voices, I felt something quieter growing, a sense that what I'd done had shifted more than just my life. It had cracked something open that could never be sealed again. That morning, I was scheduled for a final checkup at Womack. The hallways felt lighter now, conversations less guarded. When I walked into Dr. Nash's office, she stood from her desk with a tired smile. "Sergeant Ellis," she said. "Or should I say the most talked-about patient in the DoD medical system?" I smiled faintly. "Not sure if that's a good thing." "It's a necessary thing," she replied, motioning for me to sit. "How's the pain?" "Better," I said truthfully. "Still tender, but manageable." She nodded, scanning my chart. "Good. Your heart's healing, and so is the rest of you. But you'll need follow-ups. Physical therapy counseling. The body and mind don't heal on separate schedules." I hesitated. I don't even know what healing looks like anymore. She leaned forward. "It looks like waking up without fear that someone will question your pain. It looks like telling your story and letting others find courage in it." Her words sank deep. For the first time, I let myself exhale fully, the tension in my chest easing. "What happens to Patricia now?" I asked. Dr. Nash's expression turned solemn. "The investigation concluded yesterday. She's been officially charged with falsifying medical records and professional misconduct. Her federal contractor license has been revoked permanently. There will be a civilian court hearing under federal jurisdiction. I sat back, absorbing the news. So it's over. For her, yes, she said. For you, this is just the beginning. As I left the office, the air outside felt sharper, cleaner. Soldiers saluted as I passed some hesitant others firm. Respect, not pity, hung in their gestures. I made my way toward the flagpole near the main gate and stopped watching the fabric ripple against the pale blue sky. The same base that had once suffocated me now stood as proof of what truth could survive. I thought of all the mornings I'd woken up dreading formation, all the nights I'd cried into my pillow hoping no one would hear. And then I realized something. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was rebuilding. I had fought a war that didn't exist in any field manual and won. 2 weeks later, I was called to testify at Patricia's federal contractor hearing in Raleigh. It wasn't a full courtroom, just a sterile conference room lined with flags and file stacks, but the weight of it felt heavier than any battlefield I'd faced. I arrived in uniform, every button polished, every crease sharp, because this time I wanted her to see what strength looked like when it didn't need to dominate. Patricia sat across from me, civilian clothes now replacing the authority she'd once wrapped around herself like armor. Her hair was looser, her face pale, her confidence replaced by a tremor she tried to hide. The judge read through the list of charges: falsifying medical documentation, obstruction of investigation, misuse of federal access credentials. Each one sounded colder, more distant, as though her cruelty had finally been stripped of its emotional disguise. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I trusted the system to protect me, I said. She used it to silence me. I asked for medical help, and she used her position to deny it. But this case isn't just about me. It's about what happens when personal grudges hide behind professional power. Patricia stared down at her lap, refusing to meet my eyes. I continued. I grew up in a house where silence was survival. My father believed order was love, and she believed control was care. I carried that same silence into the army because I thought it was strength. It wasn't. It was fear disguised as discipline, and fear kills more soldiers than bullets ever will. The room was quiet. Even the judge, a man who'd probably heard 1,000 testimonies, leaned forward slightly. I finished softly. This isn't revenge. This is accountability, because truth doesn't punish it, prevents. When I stepped down, Patricia looked up for the first time. Her eyes were glassy-rimmed red. For a moment, I thought she might apologize, but she didn't. She only whispered, "You destroyed me." I stopped in my tracks. "No," I said quietly. "You destroyed yourself when you thought no one would ever listen." I walked out without looking back. A week later, the verdict came through. Guilty, on all counts. Patricia was permanently barred from working in any federal program and placed under probation with community restitution at a veterans rehabilitation center. It wasn't prison, but it was something far worse for her, a forced mirror. The woman who once mocked pain would now serve those living with it. When I read the decision, I didn't feel triumph. I felt gravity, the kind that settles deep in your bones when justice finally stops running and sits beside you. I thought of my mother, of her quiet kindness, of how she'd told me once that truth never wins quickly, but always wins completely. For the first time, I understood what she meant. After the hearing, my father requested to see me. The message came through official channels first, then through Dr. Nash, who said gently, "He's been attending every session, sitting in the back." I hesitated for days before agreeing to meet. We chose a small cafe just outside the base neutral ground, quiet, without uniforms or ceremony. When I walked in, he was already there out of uniform, for once wearing a simple gray sweater that made him look smaller, softer. His posture was still military straight, but his eyes carried a weight I'd never seen before, remorse without defense. He stood when I approached, but I didn't salute. "You look stronger," he said finally. "You look human," I replied. The words slipped out before I could stop them, but he didn't flinch. Instead, he nodded as if he'd expected no less. For a long time, we sat in silence. The clink of coffee cups filled the spaces between words neither of us could yet form. Finally, he spoke. I failed you, Cameron. Not as an officer, but as a father. I thought strength meant silence. I thought pain could be trained out of you. His voice cracked. But all I did was teach you how to suffer quietly. I looked at him, seeing not the colonel, but the man beneath the rank. You believed her because she said what you wanted to hear, I said softly. She told you I was weak, so you didn't have to question yourself. He closed his eyes, his hands trembling around his cup. I let her control both of us, he admitted. When she said you were faking, I believed her because I couldn't stand the idea that I'd missed something real, that I'd become the kind of man your mother warned me about. Hearing him say her name made my throat tighten. Mom believed you could change, I whispered. She told me once that war teaches you how to fight enemies, but family teaches you how to face yourself. He looked up, tears glinting in his eyes. She was right. I'm facing myself now, and I don't like what I see. He hesitated, then reached into his jacket pocket and placed a small velvet box on the table. Your mother's necklace, he said. I kept it after she died. Patricia wanted me to throw it out, but I couldn't. My breath caught as I opened it. The small gold locket, tarnished with time, still held our photo inside Mom, Dad, and me before the world turned cold. I traced the edge of it with my finger. I don't know if forgiveness comes all at once, I said quietly. It might not come at all. Then I'll wait, he said, as long as it takes. When I left the cafe, the necklace felt warm against my skin, as if Mom's voice was still whispering through it. You're not alone anymore. By late spring, the world had settled into something resembling peace, though it wasn't the same kind I'd once imagined. Healing, I'd learned, wasn't a destination, but a discipline one I practiced daily like morning drills. My scars had faded to faint lines, pale reminders of both pain and endurance. I'd been transferred temporarily to San Antonio Military Medical Center, assisting with logistics for the new Psychological Safety and Command Accountability Program, a policy initiative quietly born from my case. When Dr. Nash called it the Ellis Clause, I laughed, but deep down, I felt something shift. My suffering had become part of change. That truth was heavier than any medal. On my first day at SAMMEC, I stood in front of a classroom full of recruits. Some barely 20, their faces still smooth with the illusion of invincibility. I took a deep breath. You'll hear people tell you that pain is weakness leaving the body, I said. They're wrong. Pain is information. It tells you something's wrong, and ignoring it doesn't make you stronger. It makes you broken. The room stayed silent, the kind of silence that means people are listening. If you ever think reporting something makes you weak, I continued, remember this silence doesn't protect you. It only protects the person who hurt you. After class, a young corporal lingered behind. Ma'am, she said softly, my CO's been ignoring my medical requests. I didn't think I could say anything. I met her eyes and nodded. You just did, I said. That's where it starts. Watching her shoulders loosen as she smiled shyly reminded me of who I'd been not so long ago, frightened, doubting my own reality trapped between duty and fear. That version of me still lived inside, but now she had a voice. That evening, I walked along the base trail behind the hospital. The Texas sun burned low, bleeding orange into the horizon. My father had called earlier to say he'd joined a veterans' mental health outreach group working with other retired officers to unlearn the habits that made them dangerous to their own families. His voice was steadier, softer. I didn't know if forgiveness had arrived yet, but something like it hovered near. As the wind shifted, I touched the locket resting against my uniform. It was warm from the sun, the gold faintly glowing. I thought of Patricia not with hate, but with an odd clarity. She was still serving her restitution hours, working with veterans whose injuries she could no longer dismiss. I wondered if she looked them in the eyes, if she finally understood that empathy and control were not the same thing. The sky darkened to violet as the first stars appeared. I whispered, Mom, we're okay now. The words surprised me, simple, unforced, true. The sound carried softly across the field, dissolving into the dusk. For the first time, peace didn't feel like silence. It felt like honesty finally breathing free air. 6 months later, I stood before a crowd at the annual Fort Liberty Leadership Symposium, an event I'd once watched from the back row, invisible among uniforms and titles. Now I was at the podium, the lights warm on my face, the hum of the room a steady reminder that people were listening. The banner behind me read, "Resilient Command Building Cultures of Trust." When my name was announced, Staff Sergeant Cameron Ellis, guest speaker on ethics and accountability, the applause rose not out of spectacle but recognition. I took a slow breath and began. "I used to think silence was loyalty," I said, my voice echoing off the high walls. "That discipline meant endurance even when it hurt. I thought pain was proof of strength. But I was wrong. Strength isn't how much you can hide, it's how much truth you can stand to tell." Faces in the crowd blurred as I spoke. Young soldiers, seasoned officers, medics, even civilian contractors, each one carrying their own private weight. I told them about the day Patricia slammed me into that locker, about the months of gaslighting that followed, about how I recorded her not out of vengeance, but out of desperation to survive. When that recording played, I said it wasn't about punishment. It was about proof that what I felt, what I lived, was real. A few heads nodded quietly. The hardest part of recovery wasn't the surgery or the investigation, I continued. It was learning that I could still believe in something bigger than fear. That the same institution that hurt me could also heal me if I was willing to stand my ground. Afterward, people came up to speak with me. A captain told me his sister had gone through something similar in another branch. A medic thanked me for making paperwork mean something again. A young private no older than 20 said softly, "Ma'am, I thought reporting things would ruin my career. Now I'm not so sure." I smiled and told her the truth. Courage doesn't ruin careers, it rebuilds them. When the hall finally emptied, I stood alone on the stage for a while, the applause still fading from my ears. The medal on my chest caught the light, small, unassuming, but it carried the weight of 1,000 unsaid stories. I ran my thumb along its edge and thought of everyone who had ever been told to endure quietly. Somewhere out there, another soldier was watching the clock at 500, feeling pain she didn't yet understand, afraid no one would believe her. Maybe one day she'd hear my story and realize she wasn't alone. Maybe that was the point of all of it, to make sure no one else mistook silence for strength. That night, I drove out beyond the base to a quiet hill overlooking the training fields. The air smelled like pine and rain. The floodlights in the distance glowed faintly, just enough to illuminate the flag still waving against the dark. I sat on the hood of my truck, the locket warm against my skin, and thought about the strange symmetry of it all. Patricia was still completing her community service in Fayetteville. My father had retired completely and joined a mentorship program for veterans struggling with post-command adjustment. We didn't talk often, but when we did, his voice no longer carried command, it carried care. We were both learning to speak new languages. His was humility, mine was forgiveness. In my quiet moments, I still saw flashes of that morning, the locker, the cold metal, the sound of her voice, but they no longer owned me. They were memories, not chains. Sometimes I wondered if Patricia ever thought of that day, if she regretted anything beyond being caught. But the truth is, it didn't matter. Her choices had defined her. Mine had freed me. As the wind shifted, I whispered the same words I'd said on that hospital bed months ago. "We get through this. Only this time it wasn't a promise made out of pain. It was a declaration made out of peace." I watched the stars blink through the clouds and felt something like gratitude. Not for what happened, but for what it taught me, that strength isn't forged in silence, but in the decision to break it. Before leaving, I took out my phone and opened a new note. The cursor blinked against the dark screen. I typed slowly, to every soldier, daughter, son, and survivor who was told to toughen up when all they needed was to be heard. Your voice matters. Your pain matters. And one day, your story might save someone else. I paused, then added, if you've ever had to fight to be believed, tell me where you're watching from. You're part of this too. The wind picked up, carrying the faint sound of morning drills from miles away. Somewhere out there, another formation was beginning, boots striking ground in rhythm. For the first time, that sound didn't feel like pressure, it felt like purpose. When I climbed back into my truck, the dashboard clock read 05:45 a.m. the exact time everything had started. I smiled. This time it wasn't dread that filled my chest. It was clarity. I drove back toward Fort Liberty as the sun began to rise over the horizon, golden light spilling across the base. The same light that had once exposed my pain now painted everything new. Sometimes the hardest battles aren't the ones fought in the field, they're the ones fought in silence. But when truth finally breaks through, it doesn't just change a person. It changes the world around them. As the gates of Fort Liberty came into view, I whispered one last line to myself, the same one I now closed every talk with, the one that had become my truth. Some scars don't mark weakness, I said softly. They mark survival, and survival is its own kind of victory.